Morning starting at 9:30 a.m. for Stolen Moments. Congregation Eitz Chaim.
Abacoa Insurance.
Hi, my name is Eileen at Abacoa Insurance. We are here to help you with all your insurance needs. So if you think you are paying too much, please call us 877-331-3326. And remember, folks, we write insurance for the entire state of Florida, from Key West to the Panhandle. So give us a call.
When you've had it with the rest, call the best. Abacoa Insurance.
877-331-3326.
Do you believe you have a legal case? Maybe a workplace issue? Are you owed wages or overtime? Have an issue with employment discrimination or sexual harassment? Have you or someone you love been denied family or medical leave? Or do you have a landlord-tenant problem? Have you been defamed? Or have your civil rights been violated? Call in with your questions to Attorney Stuart M address. Ask a Lawyer, Fridays, beginning at 10 a.m. just after Swap Shop on WPSL, the digital talk of the Treasure Coast.
This is WPSL Port St. Lucie.
The opinions expressed are those of the host and guests of this program and are not necessarily those of station staff, management, or sponsors. WPSL does not endorse products that may be mentioned. Any reproduction or retransmission of this broadcast is strictly prohibited without written consent of WPSL. It's time to Ask a Rabbi. Call in with your questions and comments at 340-1590. And now, here's your host, Rabbi Shafir Lobb.
Hello there. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Congregation Eitz Chaim, and I am here for Ask a Rabbi, so please call in with any questions you might have, 772-340-1590. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about the program that we've got coming up. It is coming up this week, isn't it? On the 24th of October in the evening, we have Taste of Judaism, which is part of a 3-part program, and it's in conjunction with URJ. We're a member of the Union of Reformed Jewish Congregations, and they have a program called Taste of Judaism, and it is intended for anybody who's got any interest, any curiosity, any questions, and you're all welcome to come. You do not need to be Jewish. You might have no interest other than being curious about learning what Judaism has to say about something. And that's Wednesday. There's 3 classes in it. Thank you for watching. On the 24th of October, and then the 14th and the 18th of November. So they're spaced a little bit so you can fit them into your schedule, 7:30 to 9:30, no charge. There's both a taste mentally and a taste physically. There'll be some food, some Jewish foods that you can taste and spend a little time. The topics are spirituality, and then values, and then community. So the 24th we'll be talking about spirituality. So we'll take a look at some of the different things that the Jews say and do, and why we say and do them. And any question there is welcome as well. So that one will not be streamed, but if you come to our temple at 540 Northwest University Boulevard, that's right across from Met Stadium. It's in the blue office building, Suite 102, the front of the center building. And the center of the front building, something like that. One of those, you'll find it. We're there, Suite 102, right near the elevator. So we're pretty easy to find, and we welcome you. We do ask that you register, so we make sure we have enough copies. You can do that on Facebook or on our website. Facebook's probably actually better this time. So that's up and coming, and I think those are 3 interesting topics. We'll probably talk some more about them as we go on into the next few weeks and develop those topics. I don't want to give anything away for Wednesday, but it's a kind of an interesting thing. We'll be taking a look at historically how spirituality has been viewed and understood, and also how it's in the modern times as well. So those are kind of exciting things, and I know we had a really good expo. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to all of our vendors who came. Thank you to our wonderful sponsors who helped make the event possible. And a big yay to everybody in my congregation who worked their tails off to make it happen.
Thanks for everybody who wanted popcorn.
Yeah, there you go. Stuart was there popping popcorn. He definitely filled the air with the sweet smell, or the I don't know, sweet's not the right word for popcorn, but it's just
Distinctive.
the savory smell of popcorn. So that's kind of a cool thing, and we're glad that happened, and thank you for doing that, obviously. A thank you to Brian for chairing it and helping to arrange everything, to Marion for all that she did. And there was just a ton of people who did a ton of work. Thanks to my husband, too, who had to schlep some of that stuff. Poor guy always gets to schlep the stuff. He always gets to lug things. It's not easy to be a rabbi's husband.
And if people want to know what schlep means, they can come to A Taste of Judaism.
They can come to A Taste of Judaism and find out what schlep means. So yeah, let me address, though, the idea of a rabbi's husband, because that's, women rabbis. Women have been rabbis for really much longer than people realize. In America, it's only been since the 70s, but in Europe, we know of women rabbis that predate the war, and there's a couple of them. And there's my father of blessed memory actually used to talk about this one rabbi that rabbis in Europe didn't usually lead the service. That's a shaliach tzibor, somebody whose job it is to lead the service. And the rabbi might give a sermon, the rabbi would teach, the rabbi would do a number of other things in the community, but leading services wasn't one of the typical things. That's more of an American model. And my father used to say that this particular rabbi was so revered, so respected, that whenever the rabbi came into the sanctuary, into the temple, that the prayers would stop and people would stand up until the rabbi sat down upstairs. Right. And so that's a clue that this rabbi is a woman, because the women in a traditional or an Orthodox congregation, especially the older ones, would go upstairs into a balcony and
Even
watch.
the rabbi?
Even a rabbi. And maybe especially a rabbi. Again, not one to lead the service, right? So they're not needed downstairs. They're just going upstairs to daven. But
That would not have sat well with you, right?
I've been upstairs in a mechitza. It's called a mechitza, a separation. And I've been there. My grandmother, also of blessed memory, always went upstairs to the mechitza. There's kind of a funny story. I used to spend afternoons with her, but not when I was very, very little, because when I was very, very little, we lived in California. But when we moved back east, then I started summering with her in Brooklyn for a couple of reasons. And she would take me to shul, and we'd go upstairs and daven. And the first time that we did that, she opened up the prayer book, and she's running her finger along and showing me where everything is. I realized that, I'm less than a year away from my bat mitzvah celebration. So, so she leads on the one side of the page, and when it gets to the other side of the page, the side near me, I bring my finger up and I start following it. And then all of a sudden she's, this is my granddaughter from Pennsylvania. Right? So then I became worthy of being introduced to all of her friends, because I could demonstrate that I could at least follow the prayers. I'm sure she figured my father didn't. But, I can remember them having many, many arguments and discussions. Let's say discussions, energetic discussions. They weren't really arguments. And one of them, for example, was about dishwashers, because dishwashers were just coming in when the dinosaurs roamed in the backyard when I was little.
Undocumented immigrants.
No, dishwashers, machine type dishwashers, and we can talk about why there's undocumented immigrants, right? That's what was going on in Egypt, basically. That's what the Israelites were undocumented workers. It's much more that model than the American slavery of the African Americans, of the African slaves. And there's an economic reason for having what's called a discardable or throwaway population. We can go back to that, but if somebody wants to call in, they're certainly welcome to do that. But so the dishwasher was coming in, and my father was trying to explain to my grandmother that the food washes completely away. It doesn't stay in the dishwasher. Because she was concerned that he needed two dishwashers, right? One for meat, one for milk. And he was saying, no, as long as I wash the dishes separately, the food washes away and one is not getting on the other. Yeah, if you think about it, it's the kind of thing that it starts to make sense. And I'm sure that my father was thinking, try to talk a congregation, because we lived in a congregational home, try to talk a congregation into giving you 2 dishwashers. You might get away with that if you were an Orthodox, but we weren't Orthodox. We were conservative.
Here's a question.
Sure.
I know the answer has to be no, but the real question is, what is it called? But what is a woman rabbi's husband called? It's not Rebbitzin.
So we've joked about that, right? It would be Rebbitz.
Rebbitz.
Right. Would be the more appropriate Yiddish word, or a husbandson is the one of the joking forms.
Husbandson.
Or as mine will tell you, Bill. Right. You call him by name, and that's what he prefers. And but that's a good point, right? Because very often the Rebbitzin in a congregation is almost hired. Some congregations, they are hired. They're very frequently hired. My mother almost always worked as the principal of the religious school in a paid position, or at least as a teacher. And so it was common for both of my parents to be in the employ of the congregation. As much as a clergy is considered, they were not considered employees, were considered self-employed by the IRS, whether you're getting a regular paycheck or not. And so that's not uncommon, and especially in a more traditional community, the Rebbitzin does a lot of things. So it's almost a package deal.
It's like a first lady.
Yeah, kind of like a first lady. And, I got an interesting glimpse into that I'll take a truly left turn here. When I worked at Goodyear, at one point, the wife of the CEO decided to take all of the female engineers to lunch. Okay? I'm not quite sure why, but so they took us all to lunch, and she sat with us, and she happened to have sat at my table. I mean, there were like 3 or 4 tables, and she happened to have sat at mine. And what amazed me about her was that when somebody important was going to be visiting, when her husband was going to have some important business meetings, she would research the person who was coming, and she would learn a lot about what they liked. So if they were into trains, for example, she would learn a lot about trains, so she could have an intelligent conversation with the person about what they liked. And I sat there and I went, what a ton of work for her, right? So when he stands there and says, I'm supported, he really means it. He is really, really supported, by what is going on. And I don't know too many people who would do that, but I'm guessing that that's part of why he was a CEO. Yeah, it's having.
That's the wife that wanted him to go to a higher position.
Yeah, well, and that's part of it, right? Because part of that circuit of going up in the CEO ranks is the entertaining and the stuff like that you do, right? So it has a lot to do with it. So I'm sure that her skills, her social skills, were in fact looked at. It probably wasn't enough to decide, but as...
well, you could schmooze with the important people.
You could schmooze with the important people, right, exactly. And I'm sure she just was used to doing that. Mm-hmm. Now, whether she did that partially because it helped her be more engaged as well, right? Because if you're sitting there and everybody's talking about trains and you know nothing about them, you feel like a bump on the log. But if you're able to contribute meaningfully to the conversation, then you also are engaged. So it may have had a secondary benefit, one for her, to help her be more engaged. So people do interesting things, right? We don't hear much about, Moses' wife doing much of anything other than taking care of kids, but yet we hear about Miriam doing things. So it's not that women didn't. There were women prophetesses. People take scrolls to prophetesses very often. I'm guessing there might also have been female scribes, but that's probably a little harder. It's harder to know who was a scribe. And but there definitely were times that they would take things to women who worked in those kinds of capacities. So it's not like women didn't work. They did. It just probably varied. So if I'm waiting for a question here, folks, if anybody's got any on anything that we've kind of drifted around or talked about, and that's 772-340-1590. And we're going to be talking more about spirituality and this and that. One of those collective, eclectic kind of sessions where we go off on things. So, answer to your question, what do you call the husband? Bill.
Bill.
Which he likes to be called. And, and he does get drafted. But I try, one of the things when I was, we call it Erev Rav, when I was almost a rabbi, I had an occasion to go, Zalman was coming in, Rabbi Zalman Schechter Shalomi, was coming into Oberlin for his son's graduation, but it was also a great time for the students who lived in Ohio to collect at Oberlin and have our 5 minutes with him. And I remember sitting. My mentor was the Hillel rabbi in Oberlin, one of my mentors, and I was sitting in his office, and Zalman came in and said something about, well, I don't have a whole lot of time, but walk with me back to the hotel. Now, you have to understand, I'm a little bit younger. It's, a few years ago. And Zalman is a 70-year-old. And I'm thinking to myself, this is going to be a piece of cake to walk with a 70-year-old man back to his 70-year-old man back to his hotel. Well, boy, was I wrong. We flew. But if you remind me about that walk, we've got a call from Carlos. And Carlos, go ahead.
Hi. My English is not the greatest, so I'm going to try and put this question as clear as I can.
Sounds good.
I'm a vendor. I sell a beverage, and I deal with a lot of Muslim people who own stores, convenience stores, and they have this great hatred for the Jews. I thought you guys were like cousins. Aren't you in the Bible, cousins or something like that? My question to you is, if you've got a people like the Jewish people who presented us with a God, with a one being, one God, to all these three religions, the Christians, the Muslims, and the Jews, all believe in the same God. If it wasn't for the Jews, we would still be praying to pagan gods, moon gods, sun gods, like the Egyptians were, until the Jews came and said that there is one God. I don't understand why is the hatred so intense between people that are supposed to be cousins, from what I hear in the Bible. And that is my question. I would like to hang up and just hear your comment.
Okay, so Carlos's question was, why is there hatred between Muslims and Jews? First of all, I'm going to say it's not all Muslims. Fortunately, it's not all Jews. Mm-hmm. I wish brothers didn't have fights and hate each other. Why do people get nasty with each other? I'm going to suggest that that's not a function of religion or even ethnicity. That's a function of misunderstanding. It's a lack of communication, and I wish in the Bible, there's a blessing that we give our sons, right? Which is, may you be like Manasseh and Ephraim. And the rabbis say that we bless our sons to do that because those are the only two brothers in the Bible who didn't fight. Jacob and Esau were ready to kill each other. More than once. When Jacob's coming back out of Lebanon, Esau comes to greet him with 400 of his closest armed friends. That was not going to be a friendly meeting, right? So, we also say in Judaism, blessed is the one who makes peace. Right? One of the great, we talk in the morning about those things that we cannot even use up the principle for the good deeds that we do. One of those is making friends between people. If you're a peacemaker, but it has to be real peace, not submission kind of peace. So, but if you do that, then that's tremendous. I think that one of the things that happens between Jews and Muslims is they don't know each other. That's the biggest problem. I wish we could do it here in Port St. Lucie. I've said this before. When I lived in Tucson, one of the best things that we did, and I think one of the reasons for a really good relationship between Jews and Muslims in Tucson, is the Tucson Peace Walk. And it alternates in names. One year it's called the Jewish Muslim, the other year it's called the Muslim Jewish. And what it involves is it's starting at a synagogue or a mosque or a school of one of the other tradition, and then going to the other. And we walk and talk. And it's kind of a no politics kind of thing. But that allows people to discover that, hey, they care about baseball, they care about soccer, they care about the weather. They're human beings. And when you do that, then you start to have some possibility of growing relationships. So I hope that's enough of an answer, Carlos.
After you take the next call, I want to, if I may, interject on the Jewish-Muslim relationship.
Sure. Okay. And we have worked on that here as well. So, Jerry, on line 2, what's your question?
Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning, Jerry. Thanks for calling.
I was in the Army, and it worked out that my first day in uniform was the 30th anniversary of D-Day.
Oh, okay.
And my line number was 77. You're assigned, there's 200 privates in every company, and everybody's assigned a number from 1 to 200. And my line number was 77. And I just wondered if that number, the number 7, had relevance in your religion. And I'd like to listen off air, if that'd be okay?
Sure, you may. So Jerry is asking if there's a relevance to the number 7 in Judaism. And yes, you'll see 7 days to the week. It's a complete full week if there's 7. A bride traditionally walks 7 times around her husband. Now, I change that when I do a wedding. I do 3, 3, and 1, but it's still 7. It's still 7 circuits. So when you see something going on, a lot of holidays are 7. That represents fullness, completeness, right? A full week. So that's. I hope that answers your question, Jerry, about 7. There's lots of different numbers that have all kinds of meanings. 18 is another popular one. That's using a system called gematria. Gematria is where that comes from. From alpha, beta, gamma. Alpha being 1, beta being 2, gamma being 3. So when you take that into Hebrew, it's aleph, bet, gimel. It's worth noting that Greek and Russian use the same order of the letters that Hebrew uses. So, the older alphabets follow that. English has changed and the C has come in to, has slid in there, and slightly different order in English. Doesn't really matter as long as you get them all there, but we assign a number, 1 to aleph, 2 to bet, and 3 to gimel, gematria. And using that system, chai, the word for life, is a chet and a yud, so the yud is 10 and the chet is 18. And that's why you'll see a lot of Jewish donations being 18. It represents life. And that's a theme that goes. It's ongoing. People like numbers. There's just something about that. Okay, so we had talked a little bit about, I'm going to go back to Carlos's thing, and we've got from Sharon Love, the Peace Walk, and you're right. And I, one of the things that's worth noting, when there was the second Lebanon conflict in Israel, most of the big cities in the U.S. had riots. Tucson did not. We did not have riots. We did have meetings, a lot of meetings that occurred in Jewish and Muslim homes, where the folks who were part of the Peace Walk got together and actually tried to figure out how to vent some of the anger on both sides, because here was an active conflict going on. And people were afraid on all sides, and there's more than enough reason to be afraid when there's war-type conflict going on. And we had a day of prayer, we had things like that. So we were able to take that energy and reshape it. And I think that can happen. But you were going to talk here about
I was going to say that I know, for example, you're on the Treasure Coast Interfaith Clergy
Correct.
Council. And as long as I've known you, you've always had a perspective on, interfaith interaction. And, the more you know each other, the less likely you are to hate each other.
Right.
And it's also been something that I do discrimination and civil rights law, that is very close to my heart. And, I do remember, for example, after the Orlando shooting, there was a very big interfaith service
Right.
at Tradition.
Right.
And we had members of the local mosque in Fort Pierce, which is where the shooter happened to have gone, I think, once or twice.
Not the way I like to get on the news.
Right. And there was, we heard from Rabbi, we heard from the Imam, we heard from ministers, and, we sang songs that came out of Judaism and Christianity and Islam. And afterwards, I didn't hear anybody yelling or screaming at each other. I heard a lot of interaction.
Mm-hmm.
We've also, I know at our temple, we had invited a member of the local mosque in Fort Pierce
Right.
to come to our congregation one evening and speak on similarities and differences between Judaism and Islam. And that was a fascinating thing, because the more you learn, the less there is to fear or to hate. There was another, I think the imam was actually in our temple at one point. I forget what that was for. I think maybe that was a Thanksgiving.
That was a Thanksgiving.
Yeah. And there were some of the members of the mosque, actual members, and the imam was there. And, this is a way to demystify who people are.
Right.
And at the very least to see that they're human.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know, I don't know if my mother's still listening, but my mother tells a story that when she was back in the 70s working as a bookkeeper, when women first started to go out and actually work part-time jobs, there was a woman who couldn't stand Jews. They made friends. They became very good friends. She came to our house for Passover and all those things. But she had asked my mother at one point about her horns. Where are the horns? Well, she was from the Deep South, and they actually believed that Jews had horns. The more you know somebody, the less the mystery is, and the less the misconceptions. They melt away. And so I know that I believe, and I know our congregation believes, and I know the rabbi believes very much in this interfaith, not just Islam and Judaism, but generally. But I do think we probably could do more than we have done, particularly with the mosque and with Islam and with the Muslims here. And I was at a band concert just last night at Lincoln Park Academy, and I noted, a young lady in the front playing her instrument with her hijab. Is that what you pronounce it? With her hijab. And I noticed it not because it was odd, but I noticed it because it was just normal. She was no different than anybody else.
She's not. She's just wearing a head covering. Some of us do that. Hopefully, I've got it caught funny under the what else is new. Okay, so that will probably look funny on the YouTube, but not so obvious in the streaming. And we have Josnell. Josnell, please correct me. Tell me how to pronounce your name, but thank you for calling.
Yes, you did right,
Josnell, okay.
I have a question for you. As a rabbi, do you believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God?
As a rabbi and as a Jew, I believe that we are all children of God. So we are all God's children. I do not believe that Jesus is anything different than that, though, which is what you're getting at. Right. So
my question, God sent His only begotten Son. So I would like to know if you, as a rabbi and as a Jew, believe in Him as the Son of God.
Okay. Two things about that. One, I believe that, again, we're all children of God. There's nothing special about any one human. And some are more connected to God, but some choose not to be. That's a human choice, not God's choice. And because God gives us that freedom. The other thing is that Jewish scriptures are closed hundreds of years before Jesus even is born. So Jesus is really not part of Judaism. It's not. Jews don't reject Jesus. It's that there's no role for Jesus to play in our lives. We're not alienated from God. God has not rejected us. And we do not accept the concept of original sin that became part of the Greco-Roman system. We do not see that we inherited anything from Eve eating the apple, which wasn't probably an apple, which is probably more likely a date or a pomegranate, but we talked about that once before. So the answer to it is not a rejection, but simply a no comment kind of an answer, if you will.
But, like the Bible says, God says, anything that you ask me, ask it to me in the name of Jesus, and it will be given. So when you pray, after your prayer, and do you say that in the name of Jesus that I pray you, amen, or do you just pray in the name of God without involving Jesus Christ in it?
We just pray in the name of God because our scriptures ends with Chronicles. What you call New Testament, we call Christian scriptures. It's a different, the Bible is slightly different between Jews and Christians. Jews go from Genesis through Chronicles, and the books of Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John are interesting stories to us. They're sacred Christian scriptures, but they're sacred for Christians, not for Jews.
How would I make a distinction between a Christian and a Jew if we all are children of God? We should be having the same rules. Jews and Christians should basically be the same, since we are all children of God and we are waiting for Christ's second coming.
Well, we're not. I guess that's the point. We're not waiting. Right, we're with God. We've got no concerns. Come to a service and you'll see God. I believe you'll feel and see God. God is to be experienced. It's a different system. It's not a different God, but it's a different way of understanding God. So
Okay.
So
Very good.
here's the piece, right? Judaism and Christianity and Islam and Hinduism are all believers in one God creating one universe. And last I looked, we all live on the same universe. Right? We're all living on Earth, which is part of the Milky Way, which is part of the universe. And if we believe that one God created that one universe, then it's the same God. We just perceive that God differently. So some need, want, desire, resonate with, whatever set of words you want to use, the idea of God having an incarnation as a son. Jews do not. There's no role for Jesus to play in Judaism.
Okay.
We do not need to be saved.
Because you are already saved.
Right. We come out of the womb perfect, and we do things that are less than perfect as we get older. As soon as they cut that umbilical cord, it starts. But we consider a child, a 3-year-old, is not capable of sinning because they don't know enough to sin.
Absolutely.
Okay, so how can that child be anything less than God's gift to the world and welcomed back to God? The soul goes right back to God, says Judaism.
So I have one last question for you. In one word, does that mean you observe the Sabbath from sundown, Friday evening, to sundown,
Correct.
Saturday evening?
Yes, that is correct. We celebrate Shabbat or Sabbath from sundown Friday till sundown Saturday. And it's a day of rejuvenation, refreshing ourselves, and recognizing the amazing wonder of having life and being part of this amazing solar system and the mysteries of life and all of the different colors of green.
So what about people who does not observe the Sabbath? Do you kind of look at them in a different way, or less than basically doing God's will?
No, that's between them and God.
Okay.
It's not my job to worry about their soul. I've got more than enough to do to worry about my own. People need to do what works for them. Muslims have their day of gathering on Friday. That's the day they come together. Christians typically do it on Sunday. Everybody needs a day of reflection and reconnection, which is what the idea of that is. But it doesn't matter what day it is. In fact, it kind of helps the planet if everybody's not doing it on the same day. It makes it easier for hospitals and taxis and restaurants to function if not everybody's taking their Sabbath on the same day. I like the idea of everybody having one because I think that's important for health and for connecting to the source of our breath. So I hope
Okay.
I hope that answered your question.
You have. And where is your congregation is at again? So
It's
I can
called
say
Congregation Eitz Chaim, and it's in Port St. Lucie on 540 Northwest University Boulevard, Suite 102.
All right. Thank you so much for answering my question.
You're welcome. Take care. Bye-bye. And Carlos on line 2 with another question.
Go ahead, Carlos. You're on with the rabbi.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hi, Carlos. Well, thanks for calling again.
Hi. Yeah, touching up on that, on the last question I had, and the gentleman who just called, Jesus was a Jew, and he died as a Jew. And after he died, Christianity came off that because there were some Jewish people that believed in what he was preaching, and they prayed it, and they put it against the globe, and Christianity was born. But on the first question that I had on the Muslims and the Jews, I get what you're saying. You know, the singing after the terror thing that happened in Orlando, and also in Paris, and wherever happens in Los Angeles. But what I'm trying to say is we're getting the short end of the stick because we're not the ones, whether be Christians or Jews, we're not the ones who are committing these horrific crimes. And all we're doing is singing songs and turning the other cheeks. Is there anything else that we can do to stop this, to go into these communities and speak to these people? Because there is a hatred in these communities. And I'm just going to hang up and call.
Okay, well, thank you, Carlos. So Carlos asked, he was saying that with everything that's going on with Orlando and France, yeah, well, I wish that was the only violence in the world. So, Carlos, there's a couple of things to add to that. The only cure for hatred is education. Getting people to know each other, to build those bridges, because when you know somebody, it really changes. So let me share an example. I had a Christian in Tucson who got really, really, really mad at me because I stood up and did the peace walk and talked about how Muslims were human beings. And he got really, really mad at me. But then he got to know a Palestinian. And then his whole mood changed. And I will give him credit. He called me and apologized and said, I got to know somebody and I see that where I was coming from was a lack of knowledge. So that really is the key. And I will talk to one other thing, Carlos. You talk about the publicity surrounding Orlando. Orlando was not... here we go. That was not a religious thing. There was a whole lot more involved, and that was a person who was definitely off in some weird space. And, I wish that Muslims were the only ones who did violence in the world instead of being the ones to receive the bulk of it. We don't hear about it, but the number one recipient of terrorism is Muslims.
Against other Muslims.
It varies. It's all over the place, but they are the number one victim. Most of the terrorism is against Muslims. Sometimes it's Muslim, which shows you that it's not religion, right? Terrorism is a political function. It's not a religious function. It's a kind of, that kind of extremism is a mental, social construct.
If you use
but
statistics...
the problem is when you do it and they say it's in the name of religion.
Everybody,
they convert,
but
they
but
subvert
so,
the religion.
so does Westboro Baptist Church, but I don't think most Christians want to own them.
Yeah, and if that religion wanted everyone dead, we'd be gone because of the sheer numbers.
Right. Muslims are the second largest religion on the planet and the fastest growing. They're the fastest growing religion for a couple of reasons. One, in many countries, they still have large families. The other reason is that people are actually attracted to it. Imagine that. Yeah, it's not a religion that teaches hatred. It's a religion that teaches peace and love. That doesn't mean that somebody like, an Osama bin Laden or Boko Haram, which is actually one of the worst terrorist groups on the planet, or
Al-Qaeda.
Thank you, Al-Qaeda. Those are politicians wearing religious robes, right? They're hijacking the religion and using it to try to say God is with me.
And they're good community organizers because what they're doing is they're taking this group of people and pitting them against another group.
Well,
and as long as a group listens,
as long as they can focus
to that,
them, okay, what they're doing, and unfortunately, a lot of politicians do, is they grab people's fear and anger and direct it at a target other than themselves, and that way they're not having to elevate people, right? So if I tell you that the reason you're poor is because of something, like illegal immigration, right? Undocumented workers, that's why you're poor. I can keep you focused on that, and then I don't have to do anything about getting your life better. All right.
Yeah, because you're not angry at me, you're angry at
You're
someone
angry
else.
at yeah. I can refocus that energy, and I can keep stealing. Right, which is not, and that happens around the planet. It's around the planet. That's not an American problem. That's a human problem. That's a human condition problem, that we respond to fear knee jerks. And unfortunately, politicians whose job it is to get elected, or perceive their only function as to get elected, not necessarily to do something once they're elected other than get reelected, right? They start campaigning.
Especially in the House, 2-year terms.
Short terms makes people constantly looking for that next election. And it keeps them from doing the work that we'd like them to do, realistically. And I've known a few Congress people who went with high dreams. They were going to do something, and then discovered that as soon as they were elected, man, they had to work and try to get reelected. So that's a really sad part about government. We have designed our government to keep people ineffective. On the other hand, if we elect them and let them sit there for too long, then they can really go
Well, they
off
go
the
join
wall.
the club. They become a part
Right,
of
they
something
become
other than what they thought they were getting into in the first place.
Right.
And then they want to stay there.
Yeah. Well, they get well paid.
Sure. Their life is wonderful.
Their life is wonderful, and around the world, being in government is a good way to get rich, not just in America. All right, and it's not necessarily your income, but it's all the other doors that open to you.
And in some countries, that just means that you have a meal on your table every single night,
Right.
and you're safe.
Yeah. Well.
You
Or
did want to
safer.
go to your long walk story.
Okay, so to the long walk, the Tucson Peace Walk. Right?
No, Rabbi
No,
Lobb.
Oh,
To the hotel.
Oh, back at the hotel. Thank you, Stuart. Okay. So we were at Oberlin. Thank you. And I hope, Carlos, I answered your question. I think the big key is people getting to know each other and sitting down and breaking bread, right? Having a meal together, looking at each other's services. None of us praise that the other one
It's more of a people problem than a religion problem.
Yeah, it's a people problem, and the religion gets hijacked.
Can I give a good example on that before you go to Oberlin?
Okay, let's before I go back to Oberlin.
I'm sorry. When I first met you,
Yeah.
sitting in the congregation,
good
you're the
follow.
brand new rabbi at this other temple.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, 6 years
And
ago.
I have to, I've
7
told you
years
this
ago.
story. You know this story, but I have to be honest. The first time you went onto the bima, the pulpit, and I see this woman up there, is the first time I'd ever seen a woman rabbi. And, I do discrimination and civil rights law, but I got to tell you, there was no beard, and it did not look to me like a rabbi. And I sat
She's
there.
stroking her beard.
Right. I sat there looking and thinking, I don't think this is going to work. That was my reaction. But that's the same thing we're talking about.
But you grew up that way. That's what you
You're
know.
right. You're
That's
right.
what
You're right. I grew up. Rabbis were men.
Still,
The Rebbitzin were the women.
It's still sexism.
You're right. But that was my reaction. What changed? Why am I here now? What changed? What changed is who you are. Okay, it didn't matter over the course of time. I may have been hostage in that congregation because that's where I went to temple, and so you happen to be the rabbi. But it didn't take that long for me to listen to your sermons and to enjoy the sermons and to enjoy the way you conducted a service.
So you said, I'll give this a chance?
Well, I had no. Honestly, I mean, I guess I could have walked out, but I wasn't that extreme of a reaction. It was like, an oddity that what? How did this happen? I didn't know this. And the whole point is that once you get to know somebody, a lot of those preconceptions, misconceptions, prejudice conceptions can fall away. And to me, I think one of the great examples is just that initial, I won't say a negative reaction, the initial curious, hesitant, reaction to seeing this female rabbi on the bima, to where we were now instrumental in creating this synagogue. I'm president of the synagogue, and as I've said before in public, I don't always agree with Rabbi Lobb, and when I don't, I will disagree with her, including on what makes up a day. But I have the utmost of respect.
Our running argument.
For her. And so you get to know somebody, and that's what happens. And that's really what I think, if the world would take that in. And I do think that my kids' generation is doing a lot better of a job at that. Not perfect, but a lot better at looking at people and accepting them for who they are without judging initially based upon color or religion or what have you. Just, is this a good, nice person? Not perfect, but better.
Better, yeah. I would agree with you. I think they are doing a better job. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. So getting back to Oberlin, leaving our day behind, that's our running argument. Is a day a day? What does a day mean? So the Oberlin story. So as I said, Zalman and his wife Eve, who, by the way, went to the same high school I did, which is really a funny story. Another funny story for another time. But they were walking to the hotel where they were staying to get ready because Zalman was the speaker at the graduation. He was their guest speaker, and he had to get ready for it. So I'm thinking, this is going to be a cakewalk to walk with him back to the hotel. And no, Bill and I are huffing to try to keep up with him, and Bill is 6'3". It's just like he can, cover the campus in 3 seconds. And needless to say, I'm huffing away because I'm a whole lot more vertically challenged. But it ended up, and I was walking more with Eve, and Bill was walking more with Zalman for whatever reason. And Eve said, I've got some advice for you. And I figured it was for Bill because, she's the Rebbitzin. I figured she was going to give advice to Bill. No, she gave advice to me. She looked at me and she said, no, it's for you. And here it is. Integrate your own shadow. It's like, whoa, okay. And Zalman actually had some advice for Bill, which I thought was also interesting. And his advice to Bill was patience. To remember that he loves me and to have patience. And that's probably something he's had to use a lot. Right? It's not easy being a rabbi's spouse, a rabbi's partner, a rabbi's husband, or a rabbi's wife. I'm thinking back to that horrible month in Tucson where I had 4 suicide interventions in the course of a month. And, we went out to dinner at a restaurant. They had just served us dinner when the call came in. And I'm like, so here I am, we've got to pay for dinner, package it up, my crisis, which isn't mine per se, right? The rabbi's crisis is everybody in the congregation's crisis. Right? I have, however many members I've got. If they've got a crisis, I've got a crisis. And amazingly, he has never screamed at me for those. He's never yelled about them. I can tell sometimes that he's wounded because of it, because he had something planned, and here she goes again. And that, but we had a really good talk, because when we were married, my becoming a rabbi was not on the horizon. Right. When we got married, I was a flight instructor, and we had.
You were his flight instructor.
I was his flight instructor. Right. And, that was a whole lot of years ago. So it's been quite a while that we've been together, decades, without revealing both of our ages. He's older than I am. He robbed the cradle. But, so then we had a family discussion, if you will, and I went from being a flight instructor to flying a desk and becoming an engineer at Goodyear. And then one day it was like, I really want to go back and become a rabbi. I really, really want to do this. And he supported me, which was fairly amazing. Because it also meant, a significant drop in income in the family. Right there I go from a 2-engineer income to going back to school. You want to talk about knocking the family's finances. And that's just life. Obviously for money's nice, but it's not the only thing that matters in life. And so I went back to school, and I've dragged him all over the country. His opening comment to me when I called him from Tucson and said, "It's really nice out here," he said, "H, no, it's too hot." And I said, "We'll talk later." And then and I had to buy the house in Tucson. He moved into we sold our house we'd lived in for a long time to buy a house that cost twice as much in Tucson, because it's just the difference in the housing markets between the two places that he had not seen. Right? The original game plan was, we'll pick out 10 or home. And I said, "Bill, you don't understand the market right now. We bought it just on the beginning of the bubble. Thank God it was the beginning of the bubble." I said, "If I see a house, I've got to bid on it immediately." In fact, we looked at the house and we sat in the driveway and wrote out the bid, and she took it over to the realtor. We were the second bid in, but they had not yet accepted the first one, and ours was higher. So they accepted ours. And I can remember him saying to me, "Does the property have trees?" And I remember saying to him, it had 10 saguaros. Yeah. It had 10 saguaros.
Those are trees.
Well, and my answer to him was, "Well, it depends on what your definition of a tree is."
Palm.
Yeah.
There weren't very many. There was one or two palms, but not
many. You got
to
buy those at the and
you buy them.
Yeah.
I mean, they have them, and there's certainly communities that put up tons of them, like they do here at the gated communities. But the saguaros are more the and it got to the point where he really loves the saguaros. And thank you, Sharon, for a saguaro, and thank you, Wendy, for a saguaro.
Yeah. They're prized. To me, they're prized.
Well, I have
awesome.
I have baby ones in the house right now, because it's hard to take a great big one out of Tucson. You can buy them in the nurseries. You can't take one out of the ground.
Right.
They're numbered and registered, and so there's actually 11 there were 11 at the property when we sold it. There were the original 10 that I had, and I put one in the back for Bill because he wanted one in the backyard.
You've seen the insurance commercial where that falls on the house, and they say about how old is it, how long do they live, and one falls on the house, and they go about 200 years. How long was that one? About 200 years. It's a very cute commercial.
Yeah. Well, actually, more important than that was talk about a tree. There was can't touch saguaros. Yeah, is what Sharon just said on live. So the bigger problem in our neighborhood or by our house in Tucson was this giant eucalyptus tree that my neighbor had. It was on their property, but it overhung ours. And we spent more time cleaning it out of the pool. In fact, it's probably one of the reasons why Bill said, "I do not want a pool in Florida." He's really tired of cleaning it. We didn't use it enough to warrant it. But it's called a widowmaker. And so some of my friends in Tucson asked me if there were any eucalyptus here in Florida, and I would say only till the first hurricane, because they don't have any limb strength. And if a hurricane came through, the eucalyptus would go somewhere else. So there aren't too many places where a eucalyptus can live. So, and that's, I guess, the bottom line that I'll say. That'll be my closing point on religions, which is, look at how many different kinds of palm trees there are. Look how many different kinds of trees there are. Look how many different kinds of cacti there are. If God wanted everybody to be the same, there would be one shade of green and one kind of palm tree. And that's Ask a Rabbi for today. I'll see you next week at 11:05.
This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure
News on the hour, sponsored by TheraWorks Relief.
I'm Steve Kathan. President Trump vows tough action as a caravan of some 3,000 Central Americans winds its way to the southern border. And he says he'll be watching how Mexico handles all this. CBS's Jeff Pegues.
The Mexican authorities have mobilized some police units to go and confront them, but they're obviously trying to limit how far they get. Of course, President Trump has asked that Mexican authorities step in and try to limit the flow of these groups.
Mr. Trump alleges the caravan's being coaxed down by Democrats. Daniela Bergi Palomino with the Latin America Working Group in Washington says American politics is not part of this.
We see this migrant caravan as a reflection of the conditions of violence, insecurity, corruption, and impunity that continue to force individuals to leave their home countries.
When it comes to the disappearance of a journalist who was critical of Saudi Arabia's rulers, President Trump says he believes he's dead, and the U.S. response could be severe if Saudi officials had any connection. Secretary of State Pompeo denies a report that says he heard audio and was shown a transcript by Turkish officials of a recording purporting to detail Jamal Khashoggi's killing. Turkey has denied it too.
I've heard no tape, I've seen no transcript, and the network that reported that ought to pull down the headline that says I have.
At a Montana rally, President Trump praised Republican Congressman Greg Gianforte as a tough cookie. He's the man who pleaded guilty to assault after he attacked a reporter last year.
Never wrestle him. You understand that? Never. Any guy that can do a body slam, he's my kind of...
The White House Correspondents Association condemns the president's comment, saying it celebrates a crime. The second largest lottery jackpot in U.S. history is up for grabs tonight in the Mega Millions game, $970 million. These folks were buying up tickets for a chance to win at a liquor store in Hawthorne, California.
Pay off all my bills and take care of my children. I only have 8 of them.
I will spend it. My family gets taken care of and a lot of charities.
No one has matched all 6 winning numbers to win the top prize in nearly 3 months. At historic Wimbledon, no deciding set tiebreakers meant tennis matches could drag on a long time. One ended a few years ago with a record 70-68 score in the 5th set. Now the All England club says it will introduce final set tiebreakers when the score hits 12-12. Wall Street right now, the Dow is up 158 points. NASDAQ is up 27. This is CBS News.
To experience relief from muscle cramps in your legs and feet, use TheraWorks Relief Fast-Acting Foam. Get TheraWorks Relief today in the pain relief aisle at your local pharmacy or TheraWorksRelief.com. To experience relief from muscle cramps and soreness, use TheraWorks Relief. This fast-acting foam is proven to prevent and relieve foot and leg cramps. Get TheraWorks Relief today in the pain relief aisle at Walmart, CVS, Rite Aid, and Walgreens pharmacies or TheraWorksRelief.com. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. ZipRecruiter posts your job to over 100 job boards with just one click, and then their smart matching technology finds the right candidates. Try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/CBS News.
It's time to join the millions of people that meet happy with Zoom video conferencing. Zoom gives you flawless video, crystal clear audio, and instant sharing across any mobile, tablet, or desktop device. But the best thing about Zoom?